I'm going to paint a scene that I think goes on across the country. First day of a university level biology class, professor draws two boxes on a whiteboard. In the one box, he draws a heart. Something simple. And in the other box, he writes some interesting words, just the facts. And with those boxes on the board, he gives a speech something like this. He says, this is a science course, not a course in religion. I'm going to ask you to take your religious beliefs, put them in this box. Right? And I don't have a problem with your religious beliefs. It's good if those things are helpful to you, but it's not a religious course. Our purpose here is to pursue facts. That's why we're here. Facts that can be verified with science. At the end of the day, and listen to this, the only truths are those we can prove with science. There's 100 or so freshman students, and not one stands in protest and says, wait a minute. That's not right. This is something our culture largely accepts. Now, I can't describe our whole culture of these two boxes. I can describe most of it. It's a mixed message now, because the same culture that's saying just the facts wrote an article I read last week saying that there's a misconception that men can't get pregnant and have babies. Now, you registered that for a moment. I wasn't born last night, but I'm just, so there's more to it. But this captures so much of where we're at. There's some assumptions, of course, and that is that personal truth, like religious and spiritual matters, that's kind of separate, right? Because God and religion, they don't, God, religion, and science, right? They don't mix. And faith goes here in our heart box, right? Faith goes there, but bias goes there also, right? Because the bias goes there. Jesus goes there. But in that other box, that science is concerned with truth and following the evidence where it leads. It has no bias. Truths that don't follow from science aren't really truths after all anyway. They can't be proven. I want to spend some time thinking about this dichotomy, these two boxes, and I want to start with this heart box. This wouldn't be a problem if all the Christians agreed that this is false. It's a problem because too many Christians are just fine with this. We've been indoctrinated in this for more than a century in our public schools and other sources. So there's an assumption here about the heart box, and it's a very disturbing one. The first assumption is that religious or spiritual truths, they're not really truths at all. I mean, we can call it a truth, you want to call it a Bible truth, but it's really a preference. And it's a personal preference. And it may have some encouragement, some help to you, but it's not someone else's truth. And besides that, we have all these different religions in the world, and we can put them all there. So, Jesus, definitely heart box. Bias, yeah, because I think it's Jesus, but some people think it's Muhammad. Bias, Judaism, yep, got to go there. These aren't things that are truths. They can't be verified by science, so we're going to put them there. The whole Bible, yep, put that there. Faith, we got to come back and wrestle with this word, goes there. Islam, yeah, goes there. What about this one? Well, I wonder what box that goes in. Well, that one goes here. I wonder if it's in the right box. Let's think about that. These truths are seen as preferences. If they're preferences, Islam and Christianity are opposites in so many ways. Yes, I've read the Quran. And someone said, well, you don't know. I do know. And Judaism is even different. And they're not consistent. But people lump them all into that box. And why? Because it's not facts. It's not science. It's just feelings and preferences. And they're all of the same value. After all, you can't prove them. This all assumes something even worse. It assumes what I'll call a blind faith. And a blind faith is a concept that has entered even the Christian psyche, but it has no place there. A blind faith. In other words, faith is just a willful choice to believe something despite any evidence to the contrary. And Christians are accused of this all the time. They say Christians just leave their brain at the door. And is that right? Christian philosopher J.P. Moreland wrote this in one of his books. While few would actually put it in these terms, faith is now understood as a blind act of will, a decision to believe something that's either independent of reason or that is a simple choice to believe while ignoring the paltry lack of evidence for what is believed. I'll read you something else about this later, but there's the definite idea that this stuff is merely feelings and preferences. It is not true, and it isn't even subject to being shown to be true through any kind of valid evidence. Everything over here, no bias, it's true, it's science, it's empirical evidence, you cannot dispute it. But is that what the Bible says? You know, you would have this idea that Christianity is by design anti-intellectual. When you read the scriptures, it's exactly the opposite. Jesus said, I'm reading from Luke 10, you know this verse, Luke 10:27. He said, love the Lord, your God, with all your heart, feelings, with all your soul, your whole life, your strength, and with all your mind. Wait a second, with all my mind. We have to give that real meaning. Jesus meant something by with all your mind. He said your heart, your soul, your strength, all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. All your mind doesn't mean check your brain at the door. All your mind means what it sounds like it means. Bring principled logic and reason and looking at the evidence into this relationship with God, because the Bible will stand on its own legs. And you can love God with all your mind. How might that look? People have this idea we should defend the Bible. Some are embarrassed by it. The Bible will stand on its own legs. We can scrutinize it. We can invite others to scrutinize it. Those who do it in an honest fashion end up at the end of the day having to admit it stands on its own legs. We might ask basic questions. Questions of the Bible. Does it provide answers to life's most demanding questions? A lot of other mindsets, religions, you want to call them that, they don't. You study Buddhism. Deny all reality, you won't have pain anymore. As long as you assume everything you see isn't real. God says it's all real, okay? And he gives us a different mindset for this. He answers these questions, basic questions. Where do we come from? What is my purpose? What is my destiny? These things are there, and they're there in a consistent and satisfactory manner. But can I consistently live out the Scripture? Is this a fatal philosophy that if I take it, you can't really live it out? I read about a group of people that believe it's true. They believe you can subsist on eating nothing but air. Think about that. Even if you're a vegetarian and won't touch a steak, or you can survive on nothing but air. Can you really live that out? The ascetics in the early part of the church had this idea that everything physical was bad, so they wouldn't get married, they wouldn't have children. How long will that philosophy work? You're not adding any members to the church that way. Think about it, right? So some philosophies can't be lived out. Is the Bible does it hold up when there's a place where we can try to verify it against other evidence? In other words, this book has lots of history. We have lots of history that isn't in this book. What about all the historical and archaeological evidence outside of this book? Does it support it or not? We have ways of looking at and sifting the evidence. We have numerous documents of historical value here in the book of Acts. If you get a historian, they have a methodology for analyzing historical documents to determine if they're reliable. What if we actually applied that same methodology to the book of Acts? There's no more better attested historical fact than the resurrection. From a standpoint purely of historical evidence, written at or near the time of the events, recorded by multiple people, eyewitnesses, with consistency among all of them. Other things we read about, we take for granted. When Caesar died on the Ides of March and then was assassinated, even though they're not written about sometimes for centuries later. Now we've got people writing a decade or two or three later. We can verify this. The point here is not to get into all that today, but we as Christians have to reject this misconception that our faith is in the heart box and that it's just feelings and preferences that lead us to have to not only acknowledge that Islam and what it views is of equal value, but I should be somewhat embarrassed and reluctant to bring my Bible to my biology class. And that's just false. There's another problem here, and that's the whole idea that the Bible fits in this box to begin with. That's a big problem, and it's a big problem among Christians because sometimes we focus on really important things And maybe they almost get too much attention, and they're super important, but it gives you somewhat a narrow scope. And the Bible does not present itself with this focused, narrow scope where everything's about one or two issues. Here's what I mean. The Bible opens with, in the beginning, God. You just read Genesis 1. In the beginning, God. And then this God, who's the self-existent one, who was always there, there's nothing about him being created, he speaks, and when he speaks, things happen. I can go to my house and say, let there be light, and I'm still sitting in the dark, all right? He says, let there be light, and there's light, and there it is. And he says all kinds of other things, and his words have power. And then he brings complete order to the chaos, which is the very foundational reason that science works. Science steals from God, not the other way around. And he brings the order to the chaos. When you start progressing through those opening chapters of the Bible, they lay out these foundations that give us this idea that, wait a second, the Bible is comprehensive. No, I don't mean by comprehensive that it has every truth in it. I studied mathematics when I went to college, and I got a master's degree in mathematics, and it turns out there's no calculus in the Bible. I can attest to that with sadness, but a lot of people are kind of glad about that, you know that? It, in fact, doesn't have all the truth, and it won't tell me how to fix my Corvair. Yeah. It's just not there, okay? So what I mean by comprehensive, God's truth touches on all aspects of reality in our lives. It does not contain every truth that ever existed. It touches on all aspects of reality. That's why the Bible says, this is Psalm 119, 105, your word is a lamp unto my feet and a light of my path. My path is the whole of my life. And in a dark place, God's kind of lit a little path for me. He says, walk this way. Your whole life, walk this way. It wasn't just limited, as Christians sometimes think, well, it's got some moral precepts. Jesus said to turn the other cheek, say the truth all the time, don't pray repetitious prayers. And for evangelicals, here's how you can save your soul. That's all in there. That all matters. That's all important. But there was so much more there. A light of my path, Proverbs 1:7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Now, wait a second. If the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, and all the knowledge is reposed here, why is God over in the other box? You see, we have a clash of worldviews. We are in a climate change at this moment, a cultural climate change with a clash of worldviews. And the Bible says something different, but not only different, more defensible. I'm going to show you why in a little while, why it's more defensible. But understand, when we open our Bibles and we start to read, think beyond just, you can do this, you can't do that. God wants to tell you about all of reality. He wants to give you a light unto your path. 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 3 says, by his divine power, he's given us everything required for life and godliness. Everything. Some things, everything. That's all encompassed. He wants our whole life to be lived in a whole different sphere that he's developed. How do we fit all of that in that box? See, that's the problem. Because it's not just some preference. The Bible opens up and says it's actually true. And it's not just something over here in the spiritual sphere. It's all encompassing. It touches on all of life, which means what? God has a bunch of foundations. I'll mention a few of them. And their foundations you see early in the scripture, they're carried out for the whole Bible. First of all, of course, God exists and brings order. I mentioned that one. You can read that in Genesis 1, the first 3 verses. He exists and brings order. Scientists have been looking for the theory of everything. It was always there in Genesis 1. It was always God, from whom everything else emanates. He is the final reality. God says, there's not 2 boxes, but I made the box. You understand? And that's right there in Genesis. But then he says, he speaks, and he claims to speak the truth. That's another foundation. This idea that the Word of God is true. That you couldn't find it any other way. God had to speak to us to have special revelation, and it's true. But also this profound notion that we're made in the image of God. No other religion has that concept, that you are actually made in the image of God. It gives you intrinsic dignity and worth. And if anyone can convince you that people aren't really human beings in the image of God, they can support all kinds of atrocities against those people. It's a lecture for another day, but in the Just the Facts box, we find a history of human atrocities, all rooted on the idea that some people aren't whole people. They're not even in God's image. They have no self-worth, self-dignity, value in and of themselves. Another foundation is humanity has purpose. God says in Genesis chapter 1 to take dominion over the planet. And we have different ideas there might be dominion, but he's saying, look, I made this whole planet, and he put 2 people on it with a charge to be fruitful and multiply. This planet is going to sustain your whole lives. Not just making sure there's food on the table, but everything that I designed you to be. Our ability to think and do science is all bound up in the mind of God and put in these people he made in his image. The ability to do mathematics, to create music, to do artistic expression, all bound up. And all of that's part of taking the dominion, of experiencing the full orb of life God wanted for us on this planet. It's there, and it's foundational. And it's not a Christianity that's limited to turning the other cheek. It's the full orb. The idea of liberty. It runs throughout the whole Bible. This concept not only of liberty from sin, but liberty from despotism. And we'll get to it, and I'll say a word about Exodus in a minute, but it's there in the opening chapters. Liberty was never, freedom was never an end. It was always a means to a fuller experience of God, and so it was always an ordered liberty. A liberty with no, if there's no liberty at all, that's despotism. If there's no restraints on liberty, then you won't have liberty at all. Because I'll experience my liberty in a way to take away all your stuff. And so we have this from the early on. God says, you, Adam and Eve, can take everything you want over here, just not that one tree. There's a restraint. And as you get to the book of Exodus, he adds some other things. And another foundation, of course, is marriage. It's under attack. It's been under attack for a long time. But history shows that it is the foundation for civilization. It just is. And it's all there in the first 3 chapters of Genesis. But as you push forward and you read your Bibles, not to see, well, let me develop a list of rules. The full revelation of God in this Bible. Exodus is a book about freedom. I mean, what champions out of Exodus is, let my people go. There's a conflict between those who would give no freedom and a God who wants an ordered freedom so they can enjoy liberty. He builds a nation. He teaches them about the civil law. When I was in law school, I actually took a class that was the foundation of American law. It was taught by rabbis out of the Old Testament. How can we put God in the box unless we have all the civil law in this box too? Because our civil law in this country came from the Scripture. I mean, it's just a fact. And so did much of our Constitution. These ideas, these principles, and they're all there in the book of Exodus. The idea of experiencing freedom. Leviticus, wow. We struggle with that book sometimes, but I think they would miss the point. God and man relating to one another, something that had seemed gone after being expelled from the garden. But these beautiful Jewish feasts, Yom Kippur and the Feast of Trumpets, these others, they handed down the baton from generation to generation, a baton of freedom and a baton of close fellowship with the Lord, creator of the universe, and they did so through these feasts. It brought a memory of their history that united them as a people, and they hand the baton off to the next generation. That's why civics education is so important, and we haven't had it in this country for a long time. History matters a great deal. God knew that's why he gave us a history book. And he hands it down. And as you keep reading, you get all these history books, Kings, Chronicles, Judges, the wisdom literature like Proverbs. You read the book of Proverbs. Wisdom shouts out from the city gates, from the top of a house, and wisdom pleads with people to come to her so that they can experience life to the fullest. Not a rule book. This is a life book. It was always intended to be a life book. It's why it won't fit in that box. Because everything in the other box, the science and all of that, is all bound up in what God has to say. This is difficult for us because it's almost overwhelming. A while back, I don't know why, I was kind of impulsive, but I had bought a Lego set for one of my children who likes putting these things together. It's actually the Titanic. Like it comes, I promise you, the instruction manual is almost as thick as my Bible. And of course, I kidded her about it. I told her, it says in the box, a toddler can do it in 2 to 3 hours, but it took some days. And of course, she said, it's got so many parts. That's why they call it the Titanic, right? But when we're putting together the Bible, You just got to tow 2 blocks at a time, but you can't spend your whole life building the bow of the ship. You've got to get through the whole thing and look to God and ask God hard questions. God, what do I do from your Bible with the immigration crisis, the transgenderism we're being flooded with, all these things? I want a compassionate but biblical answer. It is here, but we're going to have to wrestle with those questions. We're going to have to build the whole ship. We're going to have a worldview about these things. That's what God offers. Someone might say, well, I don't think everything can fit in the God box. What about math? Who invented math? It's interesting. There's a whole field of study called the philosophy of math. It's evident to me that God invented math, and I'll give you my proof for it. This universe is mathematically ordered. If random processes produce the universe, you wouldn't even expect life, but you sure wouldn't expect mathematical order. You just don't take all the cards, and none of you would ever use a deck of cards, but if you took them and you threw them out there on the piano, and they landed in a pre-made house of cards, right? You didn't expect it. No less than a Nobel Prize winner in physics, Eugene Wigner, he said this, I think back in the 60s, in a wonderful little article he wrote. Wigner wrote, and this is a science guy, so he's in that other box, the enormous usefulness of mathematics and the natural sciences is something bordering on the mysterious, and there's no rational explanation for it. It's just an article of faith. He don't mean in a religious sense. The scientist simply has to assume that math works, but they can't explain why it works. That's a powerful statement. Mathematician John Polkinghorne says science does not explain the mathematical intelligibility of the physical world, for it's part of science's founding faith that this is so. Mathematics, in fact, reflects the very mind of God. And guess what about mathematics? And I know little about it. It isn't science. We lump them together. When I was undergraduate, it was the College of Math and Sciences. But it did separate them. It's not science, which means math is over here in the wrong box. It can't be in the just the facts box. Math emanates from philosophy. It just does. The fact that math actually directs science tells you who's running the ship, right? Who's at the helm? It's the math, the philosophy, not actually the science. But that's a fact. So I see God in the math. I see the beautiful orderliness of it. It's Genesis 1. It's him bringing order to the chaos. So much order that it's mathematical. You say, well, I'm not a math person. I was always told I wouldn't use math. I use it all the time in my job, but some people don't. I just manage a business, okay? In the world, and I've seen this everywhere I've ever worked. You work in a pyramid, there's a dude or a lady at the top of the pyramid, and what they say goes, okay? And if they want to hatchet you, that's it. And you're down in the pyramid, and then at the bottom, there's me, right? With their hat in their hand. When you read the scripture, that's not leadership. You read Nehemiah, it's a treatise on leadership. The scripture takes the pyramid, flips it around, puts the CEO at the bottom, because the CEO came to this planet and said, I didn't come here to be served, but to serve. So we have this radical concept of servant leadership. You see it in Jesus, you see it in the life of Moses. He takes the whole thing upside down. There are very few companies that run that way, but when they do, they don't even need a union. Their employees are empowered, they do better, they make more money, and there's morale, good morale of the company. Why? Because it's the way God said leadership works. It's from the bottom up, not the other way around. The CEO's at the bottom. How can he empower and encourage and motivate those people, not at the top, cracking a whip? God's Bible, his word, touches on all aspects of our life. But what about that? God has a place in the classroom, the boardroom, the courtroom, the press room, and even the bedroom. He's in the hospitals, he's in the prisons, the firehouse, the police station, every aspect of our life. That's his claim. And so when we talk about letting our light shine, it's more than just being honest at work. It's taking Jesus with us to work and letting that permeate what we do. But, what about this other box? The box that Professor Secular's in. Let's talk about that. Science is an interesting thing. I applaud good science. When my children were little, the girls at least, they had these wands when they were 3 or 4, and they'd dress up like princesses. They had these wands, and they invariably have a star at the end of the wand that lights up. We call them star sticks. We didn't call them wands. Mom, I'm looking for my star stick. And it would light up, and science has become the star stick of this culture. It's not a place to begin a dialogue, it's a place to stop it. To stop anyone from actually asking for the evidence and scrutinizing, wave the star stick, it's science, we're done talking. Our culture thinks that way. It's called scientism. It's this whole idea that you actually have a box that contains nothing but scientifically verifiable facts. That box does not exist. We can look at this box and think about that idea. I'm only going to deal with truths we can prove scientifically, and every truth having any value at all in the universe can be proved scientifically. What about that statement? Your scientific statement that all truth can be proved scientifically, that science has a monopoly on truth. It's self-defeating. The statement itself is a philosophical statement. There's no scientific experiment that you can prove that all truths are provable by science. It's philosophy. You're standing in your just the facts box and preaching philosophy to me when you say, I'm only seeking things that can be proved scientifically, and there really is no other truth than that. It's a self-defeating thing. The irony of all this is it is a philosophical assertion that all philosophical assertions are bad and belong in the heart box. Philosophy used to be viewed almost as a science. You had theology, philosophy, and science for centuries in the universities. And then science and theology were pushed out of the box. That's the irony to it, but there's something more. And that is this assumption that lies at the heart of science in many ways, a conviction that the universe is orderly. I mentioned that before. Without that deep conviction, science can't do anything. Science doesn't ask why it's the way it is. It's designed to model what will happen based on the observation that the universe works in a uniform fashion, that things tend to keep doing the same thing over and over. Nobel Prize winner Melvin Calvin, who was a biochemist, he says, as I try to discern the origin of that conviction, this conviction that the universe will sort of unfold according to the script, he said, I tried to discern the origin of that conviction. I seem to find it in a basic notion discovered 2,000 or 3,000 years ago and enunciated first in the Western world by the ancient Hebrews, namely that the universe is governed by a single God. And it's not the product of the whims of many gods, each governing his own province according to his own laws. The monotheistic view seems to be the historical foundation for modern science. This is a scientist that won a Nobel Prize. And he seems to be saying, I'm in this box because I recognize that it gives the answer to these questions. Francis Bacon's considered the father of modern science, lived in the 1500s and 1600s. He thought God wrote two books, the Book of Nature and the Bible, and anyone who was educated knew them both. That was his idea. But there's something else here. There's the questions that can't be answered by just the facts. As soon as you limit yourself to that, you've made a decision not to follow the evidence where it leads, if it's going to lead to an answer you don't like. And there's lots of questions, the evidence will never get you there. Mainly, Peter Medawar was another. I'm reading Nobel Prize winners because I want you to get one idea. When you poll scientists, 40% of them put themselves in the heart box. They're theists, most of them are Christians. This idea of this dichotomy, it doesn't represent all of what people believe. And so we have these eminent scientists who are saying things that we don't expect them to say, and certainly Professor Secular didn't say it. This guy that won the Nobel Prize, he wrote a book called Advice to Young Scientists. There's no quicker way for a scientist to bring discredit upon himself and upon his profession than roundly to declare, particularly when no declaration of any kind is called for, that science knows or soon will know the answers to all the questions worth asking. There's things science can't answer. And he adds, and that questions which do not admit a scientific answer are in some way non-questions or pseudo-questions that only simpletons ask and only the gullible profess to be able to answer. He totally is saying, this is wrong. This is a science guy raising his hand saying, this is wrong. He goes on, he says, the existence of a limit to science is made clear by its inability to answer. He calls them childlike elementary questions. What are we all here for? How did everything begin? What's the point of living? Francis Collins was the director of the Human Genome Project up until a handful of years ago. That's a big deal. And he's the one, mapping the human genome. And he says science is powerless to answer questions such as why did the universe come into being? What's the meaning of human existence? what happens after we die. Science done well is our Christian's friend, but bad science, or science out of its lane, trying to answer questions it's incapable of answering, that's not helpful at all. Not helpful at all. Well, there's another problem here. And I want to take something out of this box, and out of this box, and I want to analyze it for a second. I just want to think about this for a second, and that's Darwinism. Darwinism is almost, I'm just using this as an example, but it's almost like science equals Darwinism in the modern culture. And it's leapt over its banks. That is, if you go into fields that weren't even traditionally thought of as science, but not a hard science, not biology, physics, social sciences and things, psychology, Darwinism is there. It rules the day. But as we think about that, it reveals the problem with the box. The state of California gives guidelines to their teachers, anticipating that a student might have the audacity to raise their hand when they're told that we're here because of evolution. They might say, well, I was told, God created the earth, for example. And this is what they're telling the teachers. At times, some students may insist that certain conclusions of science cannot be true because of certain religious or philosophical beliefs they hold. It's appropriate, if that happens, for the teacher to say the following, and I'm quoting, I understand you may have personal reservations about accepting the scientific evidence, but it is scientific knowledge about which there is no reasonable doubt among scientists in their field, and it's my responsibility to teach it because it's part of our common intellectual heritage. That's a demonstrable lie. It's just a demonstrable lie, and it's become almost probably the biggest public hoax. Madoff only wishes he could pull it off as big of a fraud as this. There's lots of good science, but this statement here is false. They're not all in agreement. In fact, the whole field's in flux at this moment if you read current literature, and they're having problems. And I'll talk a little about why. The National Academy of Sciences has a publication. You just go online and look at it. It's free. It's called Science and Creationism, second edition. It's got an introduction. It's worth just reading the intro. Love what the intro says. And this is a very influential organization in this country in science, the National Academy of Science. They write, science is a particular way of knowing about the world. In science, explanations are limited to those based on observations and experiments that can be substantiated by other scientists. You take that and put it in your pocket. If that's really what science is, we have a big, big problem with evolution, because there's no experiment to do this. I mean, the closest thing that ever came, and it was so far distant, was to try to create some amino acids in the 1950s under controlled conditions that could never happen in the real world. But then they go on, explanations that cannot be based on empirical evidence are not a part of science. That's the boxes. That's what they're talking about. They want to say, we're not mad at you, people that believe the scriptures or even the Quran. Not mad at you, but you need to understand, we're in the facts box and you're in the heart box. Scientists never can be sure that a given explanation is complete and final. Some of these hypotheses advanced by scientists turn out to be incorrect when tested by further observations or experiments. And here's the key. Yet many scientific explanations have been so thoroughly tested and confirmed that they're held with great confidence. The theory of evolution is one of these well-established explanations. Wow. Science is cut off the very branch it's sitting on. That's the problem. When Darwin wrote his book, and of course he was no scientist, he was a divinity student, but when he wrote his book, he couldn't even look at the cellular structure in a microscope because technology didn't exist. He just thought it was like a bunch of gelatin. Now we've looked into the cell structure, and it turns out there's complex machines, incredible complexity, more than anything we can build in this world of all our technology, and that's just inside a single-celled organism. It's scary how complex it is. And so you start looking at this, there's a scientist with a doctorate in biochemistry, very smart guy, and he uses, this is just one of many examples to think about how this is. If you assume that there's no God, because we've put God in the box, and you live in this box with no God, but your atheism, there's no other option but evolution, unless you just think everybody popped here out of nothing. Once you remove a designer, there's logically no other option. That is the primary proof for Darwinism, period. That's the reason people are convinced of it. They've decided right out of the block, no designer, That means what? Can you think of anything other than evolution that would explain how the organisms got here? So with that in mind, this molecular biologist, his name is Michael Behe, he invented a term, it's 25 or 30 years ago, irreducible complexity. And let me describe it my simpleton thought. I grew up, we didn't have money to work on cars. I mean, to pay people to work on them. I didn't know you could pay people to work on them. I didn't know that was a thing, right? So we went outside. My dad owned this old Chevy Nova. He always had a car 15 or 20 years old. He drove to work. They never had air conditioning. I didn't have a car with air conditioning as an experience until I was 16. My mom bought an old Caddy that had air conditioning. I didn't know that existed either. But we would work on that. The worst thing was you always had parts left over. Yeah, and so we had a spare parts store, and you always take your spare parts and put them in there, and it just, you just kind of hope for the best. We got more nuts and bolts left than when we started. God made us these biomolecular machines with no spare parts. That's the problem. And so he coined this idea, and I'll read it to you, of irreducible complexity, a single system composed of several well-matched interacting parts that contribute to the basic function, wherein the removal of any one of the parts causes the system to effectively cease functioning. In other words, you need every part on the car when you put it back together or it will not run. And so there's lots of systems that are like that. Indeed, almost all of them are in reality. That is, even in the old days, they would say, well, your tonsils have no purpose, your appendix has no purpose. Now they change their mind. So what time was it science, right? But, the problem is, like something simple like blood clotting, we take it for granted. But look, if you don't have clotting blood and you start bleeding, you will not stop bleeding. You will die. But there has to be a mechanism to target the clotting at the wound, right? Where you've cut yourself, right? You don't want to cut your finger and have the blood clotting up here in your arm. But then it has to not only turn on, it has to turn off with great precision. Because if all your blood clots, you will die. Right? That just stands to reason that there's not a switch to turn it on and turn it off. And these things are all done by proteins. They're the building blocks of life. Proteins interact. And so you have to say, well, could you in evolution, through that hypothesis of random mutations, create all the parts, and there are many. It's hugely complex just for the simple matter of blood clotting. And could you create all those parts, and you kind of have to make them at the same time. Because if you're missing one part, it won't work. But how are you going to have a random mutation that creates all the parts at the same time? See, that's the problem. That's what they call an irreducible complexity problem. Because if you create some of the parts, you're going to lose that genetic information long before the thousands of years it takes to get the other parts. And so it won't work. This was called irreducible complexity. And what he did that was so fascinating is just as a scientist to study all the journals, not to find proof of the evolution of blood clotting, just to find a single scholarly paper that explained how it might work. And there is none. That's flabbergasting. To insist that it's evolution, but not to even have one paper that actually just says, here's how I think it could have worked. Here's how you could have evolved all these proteins that you need just to have blood clotting. If you can't even explain how that might work, how can you possibly explain how this whole human body, hands, eyes, every part of it is irreducible complexity? All of it. How could you explain the whole thing? You can't even deal with blood clotting. That's a problem. What I read earlier, I said it was a lie. It's all supported by empirical evidence. The leading Darwinist of our day, who has the most notoriety, has made a lot of money off of it, is Dawkins, Richard Dawkins. He wrote a famous book called The God Delusion and told us how stupid we are for living in this box. He thinks that Christianity is a pariah to be dealt with, and he insists that all you need to do with Christianity is demand that empirical evidence for its truth claims. And I say the same thing to him. Where is it at? You don't have to be a scientist to say, show me some of the evidence. Let people scrutinize it. What do we do instead? We do what the state of California said. Tell them not to ask the question. Assure them there's a response. Think about that. It wasn't the church, contrary to what you may have been told in elementary school, it wasn't the church that shut down Galileo. Galileo was a fierce believer in God. It was the scientific community that accepted Aristotle's view that everything rotated around the earth. Now, people had figured it out before Galileo that wasn't right, but they lost it in time because Aristotle became the textbook of the day to the scientists. It was the scientists that had to go, and because they didn't have the power to get this man to shut up, to get the Catholic Church to say, Galileo, we don't want you to say that anymore because we also believe Aristotle. Isn't that interesting? I thought we were just unbiased, searching for the truth wherever the evidence may lead. They wouldn't even allow for the idea that maybe the earth goes around the sun, not the other way around. Just saying, science has all the same biases anybody else has. I've never met anybody that's unbiased. I'm clearly biased. But there's a difference between bias and willful bias, and you say, don't trouble me with the evidence. One other thing is the fine-tuning of this universe. This is the other way in which science has cut off its own, it's cut off the branch it's sitting on. Science has shown us this irreducible complexity. Genetics is moving so fast now, and what it's taught us is if you introduce new genetic information, you actually lose something you need. That's a big problem. I can't add all the information I need for something new without losing something. But there's even more. We've expanded our scope of looking at the universe, and we have this thing called fine-tuning. J.P. Moreland's a Christian philosopher and deals in a lot of science, and he asked this question. He says, in the last several years, scientists have made a shocking discovery. What is that discovery? Well, in a phrase, the universe is precisely fine-tuned so life could appear. Think about that. I said earlier, God brought order to the chaos, mathematical order to the chaos. For what purpose? So that this man and this woman on this planet could survive and thrive. He goes on, he says, in a phrase, the universe is precisely fine-tuned so life could appear. Over 30 independent hard facts about the universe have been discovered in the form of basic constants of nature that are, scientifically speaking, brute facts, and for which there's no further scientific explanation. He lists examples of the force of gravity, charge of electron. He goes on, what blows the mind of so many is that if any one of these factors, no matter how small, much less all 30, so just one of them, if it had been slightly larger, slightly smaller, on the order of a billionth of a percentage point. When we say fine-tuned, I don't mean like the calipers that I got from a machine shop that measure to the thousandth. We need to measure in trillions. And we just fine-tune it, and we just roll the dial a little bit, the whole thing blows up. He says, then no life would have appeared in the universe. The universe is a razor's edge of precisely balanced, life-permitting conditions. If it took a little more, a little less than 24 hours in a day, it wouldn't work. I mean, there's all these kinds of constants. Alan Sandage is one of the fathers of modern astronomy. He won the astronomer's equivalent of Nobel Prize. He says, I find it quite improbable that such order came out of chaos. There has to be some organizing principle. God to me is a mystery, but is the explanation for the miracle of existence. Why there is something rather than nothing. These are scientists talking. Well, against all this evidence, against all this indication that this universe has been ordered by a designer, that our best evolutionists can't even posit a good explanation for how you could even allow for the presentation of the proteins required for blood clotting, tells me this. Atheism is faith-based, and it has to go in the box with us. I think that's how it has to be. So what do we do going forward? Well, first of all, we quit playing defense. The Bible has been like a caged lion. I'm stealing this from a man named Spurgeon. Charles Spurgeon preached probably over 100 years ago now, and he said the gospel is like a lion in a cage. The Bible is like a lion in a cage. You don't need to defend it. You need to open the cage, right? And let it all out. We're seeing a rapid cultural climate change, and it's long past time for a truly biblical voice to emerge and become part of the public dialogue and raise our hand when Professor Secular sets up his boxes. And as a side, I'll just tell you, politics isn't the solution. It always follows the culture. It never shapes it and propels it toward God. It just follows it. We need to return to a broader understanding of the Bible. That's why I spent time talking that the Bible does say things about turning the other cheek and how to get saved and in moral precepts, and they're critical to the abundant life. But it says so much more. In fact, it says so much more that all of this that emanates from the mind of God goes in there. They're twisted around. It was always one box, and God makes a profound claim that he made the box. We need to return to that broader understanding of the Bible that it's for all of life. We need to put the facts box back in the heart box. And centuries ago, this view of the Bible was well accepted. And we've gotten a bit myopically focused lately. Christians for centuries went into the sciences. I mentioned Galileo earlier, but many others. Kepler, Pascal, Boyle, Newton, Faraday, Babbage, Mendel, the geneticist, Louis Pasteur, Kelvin, Clark Maxwell. These men were all theists, and most of them were in fact Christians. As J.P. Moreland says, it was their belief in God that inspired their scientific endeavor, and not that they were trying to distance themselves from it. We need to study our Bible with a view to these difficult issues. We talked earlier about this issue is going to go on in Brenham, and we should be a voice that is wrong. But more than just a moral precept that it's wrong, it is built on a worldview that's contrary to the Bible, and it's personally destructive for those who are caught up in it. We need to see hurting, broken people with compassion who need the truth of God to not only see them saved, but to thrive in life. Not so we can go win a debate and cut people down. That should be the last thing on our minds. But to show people, to flick on the light. When Jesus said you need to be a city on a hill, what he meant, he didn't mean hiding in a corner and just being honest. He meant that they would see your light. They will hear Jesus in your voice as you talk to them. Well, we're going to have an invitation here momentarily. I'm going to pray. I know this is an unusual sermon. I don't know what may be on your heart, but I'll be at the back. Mel will be at the back. Just any need you have. If you want someone to pray with you, come back there. Grab someone next to you. Don't leave church with hurts that you didn't pray about. We need to engage the unchurched. We need to do that. I'm going to pray. Our Heavenly Father, you are so good to us, and you've revealed so much of your mind to us through the Bible so that we could not just survive but thrive in this world. We pray you help us to better understand that, to better see how all these things we're experiencing in this challenging cultural climate change, how they all fit together, how people are thinking. Give us compassion. Give us broken hearts for those who are caught up in some of these crazy ideas so that we can minister to them really in both love and in truth in a real genuine way, Lord. Empower us to do that by the grace of your Holy Spirit in our lives. We'll give you the glory for what you do. I know that any given Sunday there's people that are hurting. You know the needs, and I pray that you'll meet those needs with healing, with peace. We pray these things in Christ's name.